Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, hope you got it, jnf.org. All right, as for this episode, what an honor to welcome Gabriel Groisman to the program. Now, in December of 2015, while Mayor of Bal Harbour, Florida, he wrote and passed the nation's first municipal anti-BDS ordinance and was the first in the nation to codify a uniform definition of antisemitism 2 years later. He served as Mayor of Bel Harbour for 6 years until November of 2022, and today he's a practicing attorney and government affairs consultant. He's a partner at LSN Partners, where he focuses on government relations in correlation with the firm's state and national practice. Also at LSN, Gabe established an Israeli tech practice, working with Israeli tech companies in various sectors, helping them navigate the world of government procurement and regulatory affairs right here in the US of A. Now, Gabe is a much sought after analyst on Mideast issues, including on Spanish language television and radio. He's a staunch advocate for the state of Israel, and in 2018 was awarded the Pursuit of Justice Award by the prestigious American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. In 2022, Gabe was awarded the Pillar of Community by the Zionist Organization of America. He does indeed call Bal Harbour home, together with his wife Lisa and their 5 beautiful daughters. And with that, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Gabe Groisman to the program. Welcome aboard to IsraelCast, Gabe.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, listen, as I said at the very top of the show, I first saw you in action at the JNF National Conference that was back in 2017 in Hollywood, Florida. So I'm sure many of our listeners here will remember seeing you there, or at least that video of your speech that went viral, as you shared with me just before we started rolling. So it's great to see you again. And I really want to start out by asking you, not about Israel, because we're going to get to that, but about being mayor, because I think that in the public sector, being a mayor is probably the most difficult job that one can have, because you're constantly meeting constituents at the gym, at the grocery store, at the post office, that for those of us that still do go to a post office. And in an interview, you had said, quote, that you don't like complaining and you don't like complainers. So my question to you, Gabe, is actually, what did you do when you had complainers approaching you as mayor? How did you deal with them?
Yeah, well, I just want to correct one thing. I actually think being mayor is the best job in the political landscape by far, because of the reason you said, which is because you're so close to the constituents, because you don't live in an ivory tower. You're not in Washington, in Capitol Hill, or in Tallahassee, or the capital city of your state. You live, work, and play in the same place, so you face the residents every single day. But really, the vast majority of folks aren't really complaining. They're coming to tell you their issue, and the best thing you have as mayor is the ability to fix issues very quickly that really affect people's lives. So we can talk about big, grandiose political issues that you can open any paper and read about. Those issues, most of them don't affect people's day-to-day lives. But the issues that mayors deal with do. And they run into you run into a constituent at the supermarket or at the post office, and they bring up an issue to you. You can pick up the phone and do something they can't, which is call a director of whatever department that issue is, and it'll be resolved by the end of the day. And that's just something that's incredible and incredibly empowering as a mayor.
What was the most taxing issue you had to deal with?
The most difficult issue by far was the collapse of the building in Surfside, which was the town just south of Bal Harbour. The building is less than a mile from my home where I live, so our city was intertwined with that, and as was I, and that was by far the most difficult 10 days as mayor, and not to be a downer, but probably of my life.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, let's switch gears now and talk about Israel and talk about that legislation, that first municipal anti-BDS legislation that you passed in 2015. Can you just talk about its origins, Gabe? How did it come about? And did you face any impediments in terms of implementing it?
Sure. It's incredible because it was 7 years ago already. And this is the fight against BDS has been going on for a long time, and I've been entrenched in it from the beginning. Before even running for city council, I've always been involved in the Jewish community in every which way possible from my childhood throughout. And I was very well aware of the BDS movement when it started in the late 2005, 2006. Like the listeners probably know, it started as the PAACBI, the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, then changed its name and got a little bit smarter and sharper and started making noise. Luckily, the anti-BDS movement started just around that time earlier in the year, with the state of South Carolina and Illinois being the first two states to pass anti-BDS statutes. And I saw that had happened. And the genesis of how I got involved in it, when I got into local politics, I didn't think it was going to be a vehicle to deal with Jewish community issues. But when a church in our community, which was part of the UCC, the United Church of Christ, when I realized that the UCC as a whole that year passed a boycott and divestment proclamation in their annual meeting, directing all their churches, their member churches, to divest from Israel and to boycott all Israel-related companies. And I realized we had one of the first UCC churches in our municipality. Mm-hmm. I knew that they were going to have to come before me in the future because they were looking for a big redevelopment deal, which includes having to sign a contract with the city. And most cities' developments of certain sizes require a contracted development agreement with the city. So 2 + 2 = 4. I thought of, we have to do something quickly. And I reached out to Alan Clemens, then state representative in South Carolina, who's a legend in the anti-BDS world, mm-hmm. a non-Jew, by the way, who wrote and passed and became a huge advocate for anti-BDS legislation in South Carolina and around the country. I just called him out of the blue, reached out to a friend who I knew him, got all the background information I needed, reached out to friends in the Jewish community to figure out what research had been done on the legality of this. As a lawyer, really wanted to dig into what can be done properly, and just put pen to paper and wrote the first ordinance in the country preventing our city from entering into any contract with anyone who boycotts Israel. And you asked if there were any impediments. There were plenty of impediments, from internal within the city to the community, to members within our own Jewish community, to people on the outside. And I can tell you the way that story ends is an incredible ending, because at the end of the day, it was a teaching tool. Because when a few months later, as if on cue, the church came asking for the city to enter into a development agreement with them, and there were dozens of folks from the church there along with their leadership. And I said, you must not have realized that we passed an ordinance. It's been all over the papers, prohibiting us from entering into contracts with anyone who boycotts the state of Israel. And in the summer, you all did just that. And they acted as if they didn't know. And I said, look, instead of voting no for this, I'm going to give you an opportunity. And I offered to meet with them. Mm-hmm. And I met with their leadership. Luckily, I prepared for that meeting extensively and got all the documents, proving objectively that there was, and indisputably, that they boycotted and divested from Israel. And what they ended up doing is that church themselves repudiated and rejected their parent church's call for them to boycott and divest from Israel publicly, in a public letter that I may or may not have been involved in. And that they did that. They got their ordinance. It became a discussion at the UCC's next national conference amongst all their churches, is how to deal with what happened in Bal Harbour. And really, at the end of the day, that's what we want from this. It's not to punish people. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's supposed to be to educate and to bring this to the forefront.
And then, was it adopted by other cities moving forward?
Sure. So after doing that, it put me on a whirlwind tour around the country. It was adopted by at least over 100 cities around the country. I was invited to speak at the United Nations on 2 occasions on different conferences with Danny Danon, the then ambassador. And my office was had a file ready to go from mayors and governor's office, actually, but from around the country would call and say, hey, what information do you have on this? And we had the legal memo, draft documents, everything where we can send out. This is a time where in the organized Jewish world, the organizations still weren't sure what to do with the BDS movement, anti-BDS movement. And it wasn't just me. There was a small group of of individuals who really took it upon ourselves to push this around the country. And thankfully, the machinery of the Jewish community got on board as well, and things really just took a life on of its own, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you invoked the UN because I wanted to ask you about that. What was that experience like? And then what was the response while you were there? And what was, the after effect? Because let's
Yeah,
face it,
so
the UN isn't exactly Israel's best friend.
sure. So these were two conferences that were put
Hmm.
together at the UN. The first was a very large conference that Ambassador Danon put on, and it was really more of like a show of strength from the community to the world community and to the U.S. That the Jewish community is putting up a fight on this anti-Semitic BDS movement.
Hmm.
The second one was a legal scholars against boycotts, which was a much smaller and probably more impactful event, and where there were many members from the United Nations that were there, representatives who were there in the room, and at this point, it was really more in the weeds on the legalities of it and the importance of it, more not just from a community perspective and an anti-Semitism perspective, but also from a legal perspective of how and why this should be implemented. And the impact was tremendous. The impact there was, I started out as a mayor of a town less than 10,000 people, passing an ordinance, and ending up making the legal case for it in front of hundreds and hundreds of people at the United Nations. It really gave a lot of validity to the movement and a lot of validity to the action, and it's held up. It's held up in courts. It's held up around the country.
Right. And also, you were the first in the nation to codify a uniform definition of anti-Semitism. And I want you to address that as well. And then the after effect of that codification.
Yeah. So IRA is the definition everyone's running around with today, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Back then, right when this movement was starting, people were pushing more of the State Department working definition. They're almost identical. The State Department definition is based on IRA, so it's the same thing. But the important thing is both of these definitions include not just classical forms of anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
but new examples of anti-Semitism, including when anti-Zionism or anti-Israel rhetoric or actions become anti-Semitism, and it includes what's called the three Ds, which are when is it when it crosses the line? When does criticism of Israel, for example, cross the line into anti-Semitism? And Natan Sharansky is credited for coming up with this definition of the three Ds, and it's delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. So when you're trying to delegitimize the very existence of the state of Israel, when you're trying to demonize the state of Israel, blaming the state of Israel for all the ills of the world, or applying double standards to the state of Israel, those are examples of anti-Semitism. When we did it in Bel Harbour, it was interesting because we were the first in the country to do it at all before any other city or state. And I'm not a big fan of proclamations for the sake of proclamations. As a mayor, I like ordinances. If we're there to do something, we should pass laws. We had just had an incident in the city of Miami in the Wynwood Arts District where someone had spray painted BDS in front of Jewish-owned stores, and the community was up in arms. And I was asked to get involved, and I called someone at the City of Miami Police Department, and asked them what the status of the investigation is, and they asked me, why is it that you're even calling me? This is just graffiti. And I explained to them, I said, these are markings for people to discriminate against Jews and telling them not to buy in their stores. It's like putting an X in front of Black-owned stores or Asian stores or anything. God forbid, all of it would be terrible. But that's what they're doing. And the gentleman had no idea what I was talking about. He didn't understand what BDS was and what the relationship it had with the conduct that was had occurred, or the criminal conduct that had occurred. So I realized that we had to use the definition as an educational tool for the investigation of hate crimes. A hate crime is, people don't really realize this, but a hate crime is something, there has to be an underlying crime. And if you select the individual, the victim of your crime, based on a protected category, then it's elevated to another level of punishment. So how is it that a police officer who's not entrenched in these issues is going to know, right? If a Jewish student is walking across campus, there's a case my friend Brooke Goldstein did in New York, a Jewish student walking across campus gets spit on, gets punched, and they're screaming "Free Palestine." It's not political speech. It's hate conduct. It's a battery because you hit somebody or spit on somebody. That's a crime. It might be a misdemeanor, but you selected that individual because they're Jewish, right? Which makes it a hate crime. So we passed the definition of anti-Semitism in Bal Harbour, and what was put in was that in police departments, in investigating potential hate crimes against the Jewish community, they shall reference this definition, just to educate them. And it was incredible. Right after we passed that, first of all, got national news coverage. At that point, our city was, a small and mighty city, was known for its activity on behalf of the Jewish community. So ABC News, Good Morning America, people were covering it all over the country. But much more importantly, the Miami-Dade County police chiefs, which is 34 different police chiefs, asked me to come present to them. And I presented the ordinance to them and explained to them that it's a tool for them to educate them and their police officers, much like they get educated on the autism community and different communities on how to deal with them. And they voted unanimously to adopt it in their policies and procedures around the county. And that's something that's really incredible. And now throughout the country, people are pushing the IRA definition. There's incredible groups and organizations doing it now. And my encouragement to all of those involved is to make sure that it has teeth, that it's actually involved in something, that's tangible for the community.
And so, Gabe, how would you assess? I don't know if I have a question in particular, but how would you assess where BDS is today? And how should we be responding to it? I mean, clearly you've done yeoman's work, but for the average person, what should we do? How should we look at it?
Yeah, so if you look at it very narrowly, the BDS movement is failing, right? Israel's economy is growing exponentially year over year. Foreign investments in Israel keep growing year after year. Today, you hear hysteria on those who are not fans of the government and the new government in Israel saying, foreign investment's going to dry up. It's not drying up. It keeps increasing year after year. There's no sign that it's going to slow down. So if you look at it narrowly, the BDS movement is a failure. But looking at it narrowly is a big mistake. The BDS movement, first of all, has many tentacles. It's attacking today. You see it in corporations around the U.S. through ESG, which is supposed to stand for environmental and sustainable governance, through ESG policies all over the world. You have the BDS movement really pushing anti-Israel policies within ESG policies. That's the genesis of Airbnb's decision, Ben and Jerry's decision, today Morningstar. Different groups, you're seeing it push through. Those aren't accidents. It's not happening through osmosis. These are actual actions from the BDS movement infiltrating the ESG movement, where you're trying to have ethical governance of companies, saying that if you want to be an ethical company, you also shouldn't do business in Israel. Of course, some of them have some nuance in some areas of Israel, some other areas of Israel, but it's all the same. So that's an important fight. It's happening at the UN level. It's happening in corporations and boardrooms. I spoke to I won't mention the company's name, but one of the largest companies in the U.S., one of the largest employers in the U.S., they have a group of Jewish employees. Spoke to them just a few months ago, and BDS is infiltrating their company, and they're not sure how to handle it. So that's a big problem. And then also the effect that it's having on the young Jews around the United States, around the world, frankly, or in the diaspora. The BDS movement is very strong because of intersectionality. You find elements of BDS in college groups, for example, that are totally unrelated to Israel, totally unrelated to the Jewish, to religion, to anything, whether it's women rights groups or immigration rights groups or Black rights groups, where they have BDS elements in it, in what they're doing, and anti-Israel elements to it. And what's happening is we have a mostly apathetic under 30 diaspora in the United States in particular. And if you're 18 to 21 years old and you get to your college campus, and the BDS movement is absolutely everywhere, whether it's in what your professors are teaching, or they're just entirely anti-Israel, anti-Zionist statements, or in your social groups or in other student groups, you have to decide at a time: am I going to say something? Am I going to stand up for who I am and who for my people and for the state of Israel? Or with the education and background I've been given from my family and my community, am I just going to ignore this for these next 4 years? And unfortunately, the majority of the students ignore it. You see big anti-Israel rallies at college campuses with large student bodies, and Jewish students many times are nowhere to be seen. And I think that's a real negative. We're going to see a real negative effect on what that means for their lives moving forward.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that. What advice then do you have for parents in terms of teaching their children that are going to school, to college these days, that want to be Israel engaged but are just too nervous? And then what would be your message, Gabe, to those kids that are going to college? I call them kids, but you're 18 years old, you're showing up on a college campus, you're out of your bubble that you've grown up in. So what do you tell them?
So I tell them three things. One, there's never been a better time in the history of the world to be a Jew. There's anti-Semitism all over the world, but there's never been a better time in the history of the world to be a Jew. There's always been anti-Semitism. We have a thriving, incredible state of Israel with a thriving democracy with all of its issues, like every great democracy in the world. And we have all the reason in the world to be proud of the state of Israel and of our people, of our history, of who we are. We live in a time also where identity is king. In college campuses, everybody wants to know what's their identity. No one has a richer and more beautiful and more important and more significant identity than the Jewish people. And it's important for our students, our children, to know that. The second thing I would tell them is now is your time, right? Now is your time. You're going to get to college. I know it's a lot of fun. Your parents are nowhere to be seen and you feel like you have this freedom. The world is your oyster, or whatever the kosher version of oyster is. And
your salmon.
Yes, your salmon. Well, you don't open salmon like that. That's the problem. Yeah. But you have all the choices in your life ahead of you. But now is your time to stand up, and it's not okay to be quiet. It's important for you to stand up, and it's not going to be pretty. But at the end of the day, you're going to learn from it. And and the third thing is to encourage them to continue to learn and to grow, to understand who they are as people, because they're going to be questioned about it, and students are questioned about Israel, about what it means to be a Jew. Are we a race? Are we a religion? Are we an ethnicity? What's our history? Why are we obsessed with the land of Israel, with the state of Israel? We have to empower our students, our children, our students, our friends, and encourage them to continue to learn and to grow.
Yeah, it really starts though with education, and it starts years before they go to college. I'm sure you wouldn't disagree.
Absolutely. And we're seeing the Jewish schools around the country doing a good job at this. Finally, when I graduated high school 25 years ago, we didn't have a class on Israel, but most Jewish day schools today do. I have a high schooler and one in 8th grade, and they have classes on Zionism and Israel and trying to learn. And I know that there's great programs all over the country on this, but not all kids go to Jewish day school, right? Majority of Jewish students, I'll venture to say, don't. So that responsibility falls on the parents, like it should. And we can't go back in the past. If you're listening and you have kids who are teenagers and you feel like you didn't do enough, then you can now. There's a lot of great programs. You could send your kids to Israel. There's no substitute for that. And birthright is great, but it's not enough. 1 week in Israel is not going to do it. You can invest in your children by really connecting them to that.
Gabe, I think we hinted at it in this conversation, this notion that there are many Jewish voices, and it's a good thing. And there's always been many Jewish voices, but how do you really unite the Jewish people? How is that possible that it's something that's really Am Echad, Guf Echad?
I think through pride. I think we really can. We need to galvanize around Jewish pride. Historically, we galvanize around anti-Semitism, right? Against anti-Semitism. There's a big anti-Semitic act. You'll never see a bigger rally than after a big anti-Semitic act, where Jews of all levels of religious observance, Ashkenaz, Sephardic, French, American, Black Hat, Reform, people seem to only come together when there's an anti-Semitic act. But I think the second part, you asked, how should we galvanize? And it's really through Jewish pride and through understanding, who we are and being excited about who we are, because that's what we need. Everybody knows what we're fighting against. Everyone understands that. But we have to change the conversation internally within our community to really galvanize about what we're fighting for.
Gabe, you're an up and coming force in the political world, shall we say. You're very much recognized, not only here in the United States, of course, in Israel, but here in the United States. And I'm wondering, are there other Gabe Groismans out there in the United States on both sides of the political aisle? Who are they? Are they talking about real issues for this country? They're Israel advocates as well. Do you know who they are? Do you all have a sort of secret handshake? Do you speak to them? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the premise of the question I'll leave to you. I just try my best to make an impact on the world, and if I do a great job, great, and if I don't, I'll keep trying. But with regards to, are there other people out there really fighting the fight for the Jewish community within the political world or in the government world? Yeah, there's plenty. This is an issue that is in political circles very understood, that the Jewish community needs to stand up and rise up above the partisan fray that we see in all levels of our society today, because it's if we ever become in the United States, if we the Jewish people, if the state of Israel ever becomes a one party issue, a true one party issue, then it's too late for us in the United States. So we all really have to fight for it above the political fray. And yes, there's plenty of us, plenty of people that are out there fighting. Unfortunately, I could probably count them on the fingers of my hand, both in political circles and also just in activist circles. There's not enough, but I can tell you that there are a lot coming. If you speak to college kids, now I don't want to call anyone out that doesn't want to be called out publicly, but I spoke to a student just last month at a university that's dealing with a lot of issues right now. I don't want to say which one, just to not call her out.
Sure.
But I hung up this hour-long phone call with this girl, and I was just so excited about the future of the Jewish people in the United States, because you speak to someone like that and you say, okay, there are incredible things happening. Unfortunately, people get wrapped up in their careers and don't realize that you can have a career, professional, political, whatever it is, and also be a fighter for your people. No one criticizes anyone else for being a community organizer for their communities. We all have to do it for our own community, no matter where we are.
And related to that, my rabbi from the Park East Synagogue here in New York, Rabbi Arthur Schneier, says it doesn't matter if you vote Democrat or Republican. It's important that you vote, because neither political party should take the Jewish vote for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just vote. We're a small community, right? There's about a little over 6 million Jews in the United States today. We have to be incredibly politically engaged. If you're a Democrat, you better be holding your members of Congress, et cetera, accountable. If you're Republican, just the same. You can't just write checks. You can't just go to events. It's important for them to hear from you and really just be engaged politically, because that our future depends on it here.
Exactly. And I think what many people don't know, and I want you to respond to this, is that, the Jewish community is not monolithic, and they're more than just voting for Israel. Indeed, many are not voting because of Israel. But again, there are other issues that Jews will look at apart from Israel.
Yeah, but even so the Jewish vote isn't a voting bloc per se,
right?
Except within the Jewish community there are groups, right? So in the Orthodox Jewish community, they vote on state and local issues. Will vote on school choice a lot, right? Or on school security for Jewish day schools. Those are voting blocks on a specific issue. But bigger than that, we just fall into the overall scheme of in my opinion, of the electorate, right? There are Jews who vote on one way or the other on abortion issues, or one way or the other on gun control issues. I don't think, I push back a little bit on the notion that as a community we vote the same way on one issue or the other. I go to probably almost every Jewish community political event in South Florida for any party that invites me, because I think it's so important. And you hear opposite issues argued as a Jewish issue, one way or the other, because folks like to do it. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, people vote for many issues. Unfortunately, the over 50% of Jews are apathetic to Israel in the United States. It's an unfortunate truth, but luckily, that people listening to this podcast surely don't fall into that category. But it's our job to grow that, because those are important issues to us. And Israel and things related to Israel are important to the Jewish community, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that.
I should very proudly say, Gabe, that we actually have a very global audience, and we have listeners around the world, in some countries even that Israel doesn't even have diplomatic ties with. So your message is being heard far and wide, well beyond our shores. Well, listen, Just a couple other bases. Jewish National Fund USA, I don't know if you know this or not, has launched a whole year-long campaign called Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's meant to reclaim the beauty, the inclusivity of what Zionism is all about. And we encourage everyone in earshot, whether they're in the United States or overseas, to go to youtube.com/Zionism Studios to check out these important conversations. I've learned a ton actually through them. So with that in mind, I'd love you to share what your definition of Zionism is and what are you most proud of as a Zionist?
Sure. So Zionism is the philosophy that Jews have the right and the obligation to self-determine in the land of Israel, in our ancestral homeland, and that's Zionism as is something that's existed since the beginning of the Jewish people. It's ingrained in the 5 books of Moses and Deuteronomy. It's even, we talk about the ingathering of the exiles. There's many specific mitzvot or obligations that Jews can only achieve or accomplish within the land of Israel. There's plenty of examples within the Bible or the Torah itself. In the modern day Zionism that we know today, what made it a reality and made it a political movement was in the late 1800s with Theodor Herzl and the first Zionist Congress, who said, now's the time, right? Now's the time where we need to come back, because we already had King David and King Solomon, and we were driven out by the Romans and by the Greeks, and we kept coming back to the land of Israel, but we didn't, until from those times, we didn't have autonomy there, and we really decided, okay, now's the time. Things are getting bad for Jews all over the world. There was the Dreyfus affair that happened, and people really said, okay, now's the time. We need to go back to the land of Israel, and we did exactly that. And it's one of the most incredible stories of people going back to native people going back to their land. Jews are called Jews because we come from Judea, from the land of Israel, which is one of the names of one of the regions in the land of Israel. And seeing it today is something that's just spectacular from a religious perspective. It's jaw dropping, and it's awesome in the literal sense of the word awesome. And from a historical perspective, it's even more so. The revival of an ancient language, of an ancient people back in their ancient land, and that's really just a spectacular thing. And I love that you're saying it's about reclaiming the word Zionism, because somehow today the word Zionism is being equated with all these terrible negative things, not only based on false premises, but the fact is that Zionism is a liberation movement in and of itself, of an ancestral of a native people on their ancestral homeland. But it's important to know that the Zionist project didn't end in 1948. It began in 1948, right? It was an idea before then, but now it's the time to put in the work to strengthen the state of Israel and to continue the dream of having a strong state of Israel. We don't have sometimes we lose the perspective of time. Israel is going to celebrate its 75th anniversary this year. 75 years. That's one of the youngest states in the world. Most of the Middle East was created around that time after World War I. When the colonial powers moved out and then just created the modern day states that we see today. And it's something that we need to be proud of. We can't allow anybody to remove Zionism or the land of Israel from our identity as Jews. It's part and parcel of who we are. And you asked earlier about the BDS movement, and a lot of modern day discourse, including from the BDS movement, tries to separate Judaism from Zionism, Judaism from the land of Israel. And from my perspective, they're inextricably intertwined. And we have to be cognizant of that and be proud of that.
How often are you making it to Israel these days?
Often. I'm probably there 4 or 5 times a year.
Is that right? You were on the Temple Mount recently, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there just last week.
Right. And your experience, your thoughts, feelings?
Yeah, so I've only been twice in my life. I think it's unbelievable. About 40,000 Jews ascended to the Temple Mount last year. That's another thing that, from my perspective, should not be controversial. We shouldn't allow people to make it controversial. Even fans of the status quo, which I think is overrated and overstated. But the Jews have been going up to the Temple Mount for many years, and it's a beautiful experience. It is the holiest place on planet Earth for the Jews, and it's right in the center of the city of Jerusalem, right behind the Western Wall, right above the Western Wall. There are many gates. Jews can only go in through one gate. It's open almost 24/7 for everybody else. For Jews, it's only on certain hours of the day. You have to be accompanied by police, and you have to keep moving. And it's from a political perspective, it's strange and bothersome, and really, frankly, makes me angry that right in the center of Jerusalem, with just the hopes of not upsetting people, we put these restrictions on ourselves. We only have ourselves to blame for them. That being said, it's a tremendous experience. It's emotional. You just walk the grounds. They take you around. You're nowhere near where the actual temple was. You're not allowed to ascend there. Jews under Jewish law are not allowed to ascend to that area. But you walk around where the temple was, and it's powerful. It's emotional, and I encourage everybody to visit.
So I referenced your work with the Israeli tech sector at the top of the show. Is there any development that you're particularly excited about or that you're watching now, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a nice number of Israeli companies who everyone knows about Startup Nation. Israel no longer is Startup Nation. We're now Scale Up Nation. Israel is now Scale Up Nation because the companies no longer just come up with a great idea and then sell them for a lot of money, but sell them and let someone else operate them. Instead, now these companies are taking in significant investments, round A, round B, round C investments from venture capital funds, or even going public on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange or in the United States, and they're operating. So we have really exciting companies who are doing business with governments around the world. We're focusing on helping them in the U.S. and cities and states, and it's really a tremendous experience to go meet with the governor or mayor anywhere in the country and say, you have this problem, you have a problem with traffic? Well, great. We have a client called No Traffic that uses artificial intelligence to prioritize and ameliorate traffic issues around your city. We have a solution. It's coming from the state of Israel. And I can tell you that, and there's many examples like that, Carbine, Video to 911, or Electron, they do wireless charging of vehicles while you're driving. They electrify roads so the cars charge while they're driving. And the Israeli companies don't try to make widgets better. They try to make new widgets. So this is a tremendous experience because I've worked with mayors and governors for so many years on anti-Semitism issues and BDS issues. And I prefer presenting as a strong Jew and the strong Jewish people. When you're coming to them and saying, I have an Israeli company, there's an Israeli company you need to meet, they can solve your issues. The Startup Nation marketing has worked, because I can tell you, Democrats and Republicans alike around the country, when you tell them you have an Israeli company that can resolve issue X for them, they are excited about it, and they want that solution, and they want to be involved with Israel and the magic that's happening in Israel. So it's really empowering and exciting that I get to do it as a job today.
Gabe, just a couple points because I know you're busy and have to push off in just a sec. First of all, we have to give you a shout out and a personal connection to our JNF IsraelCast team here, because I understand that you are the notary for Eli Kodron, who is our social media specialist here on the program. So we have to give you a shout out and thank you for uniting him in marriage with his lovely wife.
Yeah, that was an incredible experience. Eli is a great guy. I'm friends with his family, and I met him. You never know the impact you have on people. I met him on a speech I gave when he was in high school, and here he is getting married, and he asked me to officiate his wedding because we stayed in touch, and he's a great guy, and it's a great catch for JNF.
Indeed. I want to talk about Argentina and music. Your parents are from Argentina, and so I'm wondering, where did your grandparents come from? Were they born in Argentina or were they from Europe?
So all four of my grandparents were born in Argentina.
Oh, is that right?
My father's side came over from Russia in 1892. During the pogroms, they went over to Argentina. So the first boat of Jews to Argentina, my family was on it. They established a town called Moises Villa and Mosheville, and that's where they lived for a little before they moved. From my mother's side, my great grandmother Hannah came over from Poland in about 1905, 1910, because she met a guy who said he had a big business in Argentina. He swept her off her feet. My great grandfather, he had a small printing shop, but the size of the business is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But
there you go.
That's how they ended up there.
I saw on your Facebook page that beautiful story of your grandmother's piano, and I'm wondering if you can share that.
Sure, that's beautiful. Thanks for mentioning it. So my grandmother is Fanny Fege Weller de Groisman. She passed away years ago, 18 years ago. She was a piano teacher. And while she was around, I was at her house in Mendoza, Argentina, playing music. One day, I play guitar and sing and piano, and I was singing her songs. And she said, "When I pass away, this piano's for you." And of course, like any grandson, I protested, saying, "Listen, you're going to live forever. What are you talking about?"
Wow.
She said, "Okay, so after forever, this piano's yours." And she passed away just a few months after my wedding in 2004. And there were a lot of complications to get the piano, but almost 19 years later, just this weekend on Friday, that piano fully refurbished and shipped over to my house. The story of the piano is incredible. Also, it was in 1905, built in 1905 in Cincinnati. It's an Ellington piano, which is part of the Baldwin Piano Company. And it was bought and it's marked on the piano in Rosario, Argentina, probably in about, I don't know, 1930 or so is when she acquired it. And now it's sitting in my living room with my kids playing piano on it, and I'm playing piano on it. And it's really just an incredible feeling. And I'm not one to put so much into physical things, but you can't help but feel the emotion, especially the emotion that music brings and brings people together. And it's just incredible.
Indeed, and it's just the energy of that piano.
Yes.
Because I do very much believe that energy is absorbed into objects, and that piano has your grandmother's energy.
It even has a small piano stool from the early 1900s marked on it with the plaque. It's incredibly uncomfortable, but I'm not changing it for the world. So,
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. So I want to go there with music, because I understand that you were a singer and a songwriter here in New York City for a short period of time.
I was. You did your research. Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, because with this Argentina background, singer-songwriter, can you tango? Do you play tango? Do you sing tango?
So no, it's a great question. My mom's not happy about it, but no tango for me. I like listening to tango.
How is that possible?
I like watching tango in La Boca in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in the neighborhood where you see these guys dancing on the street. Yeah, I like modern Argentinian rock. That's for sure. I grew up in the '90s in the era of rock, and Argentinian rock was and is still today the biggest form of Spanish rock. And so I got involved in all of that. And tango was what my parents listened to, or grandparents. So
I want to tell you, when I was
I'm sorry to disappoint.
You so disappointed me, but you made up for it for everything else, Gabe. When I was in Argentina back, I think it was about 2002 or 2003, I had the radio turned on probably 24/7, because you have those Argentine tango radio stations. I even went to the Chacarita Cemetery to visit the grave of Carlos Gardel. And it's customary to light a cigarette and to put it in his hand. And I'm not a smoker, so I had the cemetery guard light the cigarette, and I put it between his fingers. That's how much of a tango fan I am. So we got to work on you on that.
That's amazing.
Well, listen, actually, funny enough, years ago when I was in Israel, I was in there was a wonderful Argentine restaurant that I was in what's that artist town between Haifa and Tel Aviv? I'm blanking right now.
Zichoniaco?
No, someone will have to call in or write in and share that. But in any event, there was this wonderful Argentine restaurant there, and I'm not eating meat these days, so I'll just have to go in and pay a visit and say hello to them next time I'm there.
I'll make a deal with you. I'll listen to tango when you have a steak.
You're not going to be listening to tango for quite some time, my friend. So there you go. I'm not a betting man, and I'm not going to bet on that, but I will bet on having you back here on IsraelCast, because really this has been such a wonderful conversation. And as I told you before we started rolling, when we had heard you at the JNF conference years ago, we had thought, geez, at some point we got to get you on the program, and life happens, but we're definitely glad that you can make it here and join us here on this episode of the show, Gabe. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
All right. And we'll indeed have info about Gabe on the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. Hope you got it by now. And before we move on with a little housekeeping, we'd like to remind you that Jewish National Fund USA believes the time has come for us to reclaim the narrative, take ownership of the word Zionism, and show the world how beautiful and inclusive and inspirational it really is. So do join Jewish National Fund USA's Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's that year-long series we've been talking about. So do visit youtube.com/JNF Zionism Studios. You will learn an awful lot. Now, as I always tell you, it takes a homo shop to put IsraelCast together. And for that, we thank Vivian Groisman, Dara Shapiro, and JD Krebs. And of course, we do release new episodes of IsraelCast every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search for IsraelCast. It's so easy. And don't forget to rate and review us to make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. And apart from that Moshav I just mentioned, our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. And by the way, Gabe, maybe we should have you doing our intro and outro music to IsraelCast here.
I'm in.
All right. We'll talk later. We'll go through your agent. Well, IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say hello, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is indeed israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz, thanking you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.